Alright, we're back at it again here on this truck, and we're going to work on these holes where the rivet nuts were from the West Coast mirrors. You can see that's kind of peened down a little bit there. Could not get the bolts out of them, ended up trying to drill the bolts out, and then the rivet nuts spun and messed it up. Plus there's quite a bit of rust. These aren't too bad, but this is typical. This is the kind of thing that happens with the nut certs that are in the West Coast mirror doors. This one's really bad. It ripped it out bad, and it's really rusty around it. So I've cleaned inside these doors and got all of the, I don't know if it was undercoating or sound deadener or whatever was in here. Got it off. Now, this one's not in bad shape. This will be the one that I leave and not really mess with. I'll spot blast the little pits that are around it that have rust in them. Now you might want to know how to repair something like this, and I'm going to show you the way that I do this. I don't know that this is the right way or wrong way, but it's one of the easier ways I found, and I have a tool that will make cutting this metal out simple, because I don't like to cut square patches. I like my patches round. Now you could use a cutoff wheel, but the problem with the cutoff wheel is it's big, and to cut a smaller circle in this is going to be difficult. I mean, you see how much bigger that is. Now I am going to make this patch substantially bigger than the area, because I want to be able to drill my hole in the same place without drilling through weld. Now if you don't care about it, you could go on the back side of the door and you could weld and fill with a piece of metal to the back side of this, and you could drill the hole back through it and insert a rivet nut or a nut and a bolt, however you want to put your mirrors on. This one's going pretty much original. It's just going to have a patch in the door. So I have this tool, and what this tool does, it has a die set, and it's for doing electrical knockouts. You get this at Harbor Freight. There are plenty of other brands that are very expensive. These are about $100 at Harbor Freight, and that's what it is right there. And it's basically like a porta power, but it's got this ram on it, and it draws these dies together. Your metal would be in between here, and it sucks the die together and then cuts a beautiful hole. Depending on what size you want, this kit comes with 5 different sizes. Some of the more expensive kits, you have more choices. Now this is what it knocks out. You have to drill a pilot hole big enough to fit that arbor through there, so you can put the die on the back side, or the cutter end of the die. This is what it knocks out. Now this looks ugly. It's wavy, but the hole it cuts, I'll show you. I did a practice run on this. The hole it cuts, it does not deform the metal. You can look down this panel and see it's not all deformed, and it cuts a perfect hole. And then I can put a piece of sheet metal up behind it and mark it out and trim it with a pair of shears and go from there and go ahead and tack it in. So I'm going to do one of these for you. I'm going to enlarge the hole to whatever size that arbor needs to fit through there, and we'll mark out how big we need to cut that hole. Like I said, this one I'm going to go pretty far because that metal's really weak in there and it's really thin. So we'll bring you back in a minute. Alright, I measured the arbor size for that tool, and it is 3/4 inch, or probably something in metric, I'm not sure, but a 3/4 inch is just big enough to slide it in. So I drilled a pilot hole in there, and I've already got the tool set up over here, and I picked a die that was just big enough to encompass the rusted and bad area, and I've already got it in there. This is what I use to drill the holes. When you're drilling sheet metal, if you use a bit like these, you run the risk of snagging it, or it will grab and pull the drill through, and if the bit's too long, you're going to smack the other side of the door. That's about 3 inches thick. I choose to use a step bit or a unibit, whatever you care to call it. I think the Irwin ones are called unibits. This is a Klein, but again, they're sharp. There's already a hole in there and you're just enlarging it, so this is the tool I choose. So I'm going to show you this tool in action here, and then we'll cut a patch and I'll get it tacked in and you guys will get the idea. Kind of pulling the ram against my chest here because I want to catch that thing. I don't want it to fall in the door. And there it is. I pulled a slug of metal out, and it looks I know this is a very big hole on the side of this door, but we wanted to get all that rust. Little discoloration right there on the edge, but it didn't, I don't know if you guys can see that, if you look across the door, it didn't put a big ridge on it or smash the door all down. And there's going to be a little damage around here from welding it, so we got to be extra careful. There is no crash bar or center support in these doors, and this would have been right about where it would be if it was a newer style car or truck, maybe even down a little bit lower, but that should be good. And I can set a piece of sheet metal in there and trace it, cut it out with the shears. Make sure that you strip the paint around any patch that you're going to weld in farther than this. This was just a preliminary thing to see how bad the damage was. I will probably strip the paint another an inch away is probably safe to say. If it's on a vehicle, I would strip the inside back a little farther just to make sure, but it's probably better if you do this, take the door off. Alright, I just took some sheet metal I had laying around and I held it up from the back side and scribed it with a punch or an awl, something that leaves a very thin line. Sharpie is almost too thick unless you get a real fine line Sharpie. And then the way I do these, I'll cut this out with shears and then grind it as I go. Now before I do my final fit, I will take a file and make sure there's no burr on these edges, because what'll happen, or what can happen, is when you go to strike an arc with the MIG welder, that little burr will burn and sometimes it'll cause you a blow through. I don't know that you guys can see that, maybe you can. That's not 100% tight fit. There's probably a 30 thousandths gap in there, maybe a little less, maybe 10 thousandths gap, I don't know. I try and leave a little gap, because what will happen when you start to weld sheet metal, if you've never welded before, first of all, you should be practicing and not practicing on your project. It will suck that gap closed when that weld cools, and then you'll have a bigger gap on the other side, and or it will cock it to the side. So you want a gap all the way around it so that your patch stays in your hole and doesn't, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, doesn't get cocked out of the opening you're trying to weld it into, and then you're fighting with it, especially when you're dealing with a patch something like this. I always leave a little gap between the parent material and the patch you're welding in. I try and get it as tight as I can, but there will always be a tiny gap, and that is not a problem to have that little gap, as long as you are clean on both sides, top and the underside of the repair, both sides. Because if this parent metal has still got paint on it on the backside and you go to weld to it, it will catch that paint on fire, and sometimes it will cause a blow through. So you want it clean, both sides. So that's just a quick how I make patches like this and repair this particular kind of damage, which is from West Coast Mirrors. So hopefully this guys helps you guys out, excuse me, and I will bring you guys back at another time when I'm drilling and installing the rivet nuts to mount these mirrors. Alright, Alright, I said I would bring you back in the next video, but we're going to take a look at this real quick. Now, I had a pretty tight fit up with a tiny gap on this, and I did a few practice runs on some other sheet metal just to make sure I was dialed in, but I pretty much know where this welder needs to be to weld anything from 20 gauge down to 18 gauge sheet metal and get penetration and not blow through it. So this is the AutoSet 180 Miller welder. It's a 220 volt welder, and somewhere between 2.5 on the temperature, heat range, and wire speed, just a little over 40. And if you start getting a little bit bigger gaps, I usually bump it up to around 50 and bring the temperature down a little closer to 2. Their recommendation is 2.5 and 35. So 2.5 on the heat and 35 on the wire speed, but to me that's just not enough wire. So 2.5 works, but it's just a little over 40 seems to work for this 023 wire. Now, if you don't have one of these guys, it's a magnetic ground clamp, and then I just clamp my ground to it. This is where the other patch is. You can see I still got a blow through right there and a little one right next to it. Not to worry, turn the wire speed up and just do quick bursts. If you want, put a piece of copper up on the back side to work as a heat sink. But the way I'm welding this, and this door is not oil canned to hell because I'm being careful about it. Now, it's still going to suck it in here when it cools. The welds will cause this metal to tighten up and pull toward this. There's no way around it. It's just the way it works. You can blow it off with compressed air, you can quench it with the rag, but the faster you cool it off, the faster and the harder those welds shrink. I just let them air cool. The way I do one of these is do a tack, do a tack, do a tack, do a tack. Take the wire brush, I have a little stainless wire brush, because no matter how clean that metal is, you'll still get soot that comes up. Make sure it stays clean around it. It's not rocket science. Keep it clean and you'll have your best results. I'll let this one cool, and then I jump over to this one and do 4 tacks. Now, I'll do my 4 tacks on one of them and check the heat. I can put my hand almost to touching it and it's not even hot. But it is, you can see the heat affected zone. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 away from the weld. Most of these, I mean, it's pretty tight in there. It's not that far away. But after this is all said and done, and we take the grinder and we grind these welds nearly flat. I don't want it dished out. I don't want the welds sticking up like they are. Notice most of these welds are just little tiny, tiny dots. They're not very high. A couple of them are a little taller than the others, but they are very short welds. I will take a dolly and I will do my best to hold it up in there. I have a dolly, call it a dolly on a stick. This guy right here. And I will hold that from the inside behind there, and I will planish those welds down, because what's going to happen, and it's inevitable, from that heat and that shrinking of that steel, it's going to make this door a little wavy. The less heat you put into it, the less problem you're going to have, and patience is your friend. Do not get in a big hurry. You could make this repair take 2 hours once you start welding. It's okay. If you rush it and you just keep jumping back and forth and don't ever leave this, and this gets hot, when that starts cooling down, if you get it too hot, you'll hear the metal go tink, tink as it contracts. You're going to cause yourself a world of problems down the road if you want to keep this door as straight as you can. This is a lot of sheet metal real estate that's in the middle of the football field. Don't overdo it and you'll be fine. I'll bring you back after I grind these welds down and you kind of see what it looks like, and we'll put a straight edge ruler out across it so you can see how very little it pulled the metal down by taking your time. Alright, there you go. If you look at those tacks, they all connect to one another. And after they're ground down, we'll stick a flashlight inside the door, turn the lights out, and see if we got any pinholes. If you do, tack them up, grind them down, and you're on your way. Something else I think is noteworthy. See those little pieces of wire laying all over this door? Those are all my clips. MIG pliers, pair of dikes, whatever you got. Every tack, I clip that wire off. Best if you get a little angle on it, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. It will make a fast, clean start. There will be no pop, sputter, as long as your weld material is clean. Leave about that much wire, I don't know, maybe that's a little over a 1/4 inch, 3/8 on a good day. And that's plenty of wire to stick out. Also, let's see, get the camera to focus here. Keep it clean down in there. There's not a lot of stalactites and weld spatter stuck in that nozzle. Yeah, it's not beautiful and shiny and pretty, but there's not a bunch of garbage in there. Another way to keep your welds looking good. That way the gas can flow and shield the weld puddle and do its job. And these are basically zzz, zzz. That's how quick they are to do each one of these welds. So that's it for now. Alright, moving forward with these door patches. This one is done with the exception of filling it. This was the door that only needed one patch. The other hole was fine, but I removed the rivet nut out of it. So I want to tell you guys a little something about the way I do these. I have body worked this one, but I'm going to show you the other ones that I haven't. This one I use a stud puller, and I made sure to planish every weld after I welded each little tack. And it made a little difference, but like I said in a previous video, if you're super careful and don't build up a lot of heat, you're not going to get a lot of warpage. Now, I took a 6-inch DA around this whole thing and sanded the paint off. And as you remember, the paint was only ground off a little ways away, kind of like that one, or like one of these ones right here. It was only a little bit of paint removed. Now, I left the paint on there because you're not going to get it hot enough to burn that paint. If you do, you're causing more problems than you are doing good. The paint works as a guide coat for you, so I sand the paint back and find out where the lows are. Now, this one had a little tiny low valley in it here. It sucked the middle of this in just a little, and down here it was actually in really nice shape. I sandblasted all those welds to check for pinholes after I was done. That's actually sand laying on there, or not sand, but black beauty. Now, this one over here, you can see where I've checked the welds and re-welded whatever I had to fill up a pinhole. This has had the DA run around it. This one I did not planish every weld, and it really only sucked a little bit more of a valley. It sucked a valley in it here and a little valley in it here, but it's pretty much, the sander was touching everywhere. And I'll show you guys, that one's probably the worst one. It sucked the middle in pretty good, but let me get a straight edge. I want to show you something. If I can figure out what I did with the straight edge. I'll bring you back in one. Okay, here's straight edge. There's a little sand on there that this thing is grabbing the grid of. You can see there's really no light underneath there. Little teeny tiny bit underneath it. I might even need to set the camera down to pick it up. I don't know if this is going to work or not. You probably couldn't slip a business card underneath there if you were lucky. You see a little bit of light on the left side of it there. That's right at the weld zone. Little teeny bit in the middle, and then you get up to here and it's pretty much almost dead on again. So our affected zone, if you're looking down at this, is only from about here to here. I've pulled it up with the stud welder, the panel beater stud welder here, battery powered, works pretty good. So I've got this one all ready to go. This is going to get gone over with probably a 36 grit disc out to about here, and then 80 previous to that to get this scratch in it, and it'll get wiped with fiberglass filler to cover those welds up. And when I sand this back, I'll mark my locations for where that hole needs to be drilled and make a mark on there, and make sure I sand through so that the area around that is nothing but bare steel, because I really don't want to try and squish a rivet nut on body filler. It's just going to break it, and if the mirror flexes and that body filler has any thickness to it, it's just going to crack it out. There's no point in doing it. That's why I wanted to make sure the metal work was almost dead on. I mean, there's no way with my skill set that I will get this dead perfect around the weld zone, but it is level enough that it will barely take any body filler in it at all. Another thing you can do is if you have a body filler that can go over epoxy, you can mix up some epoxy primer and take an acid brush, or you could spray the whole area. It doesn't really matter, but sometimes I'll take an acid brush and brush over the welds after they're sandblasted, just in case there's a pinhole I can't see. It will fill it up, and then after that dries, you can put your body filler over it and you should be sealed up. Plus we're going to seal up the inside. So I just wanted to show you that right there. I'm going to dress this up, and we'll bring you back when it's time to put a little bit of body filler on these, because there's really not much I'm going to show on here. Maybe I'll bring you back and use the stud puller and pull some spots on this. This one's kind of low, so we'll see. Alright, we're on to the door that had both the riv nut holes filled in for the West Coast mirrors. And you can see I've got some Sharpie marks on here. This one's almost shaped like an eye socket, whatever you want to say. This one's kind of goofy shaped where I've got the Sharpie marks. And the way I check this, first I'll grab a straight edge that will span the door and make sure I don't have anything else going on. This door has a little crown to the center, but not much. So I noticed that both doors were that way, but I've got this one, and this one will span all the area that the sander was showing me low spots in. And this is basically what I did, is just drag it across here and make a mark where the straight edge actually touches the metal and there's no light showing. And I'll take the panel beater stud gun, or you can use a slide hammer, stud puller, whatever you got. I just like this because it's pretty much non-invasive. And I get questions on this machine every time I use it. And I'm going to tell you guys I'm not an expert with it. But basically what it is, it's a stud welder that'll weld a pin like this to your metal. Now it's got a little timer on it here, it's just electronic, and every time you click the button it engages a solenoid and it sends the power through the electrode that you're trying to weld to the sheet metal. So I've got it on the thinnest setting, almost down to 0. I mean, when you have it on 0 it doesn't do anything, but it's got a battery charger. And these are the accessories that I have with it. This one is just the handle with an electrode on it. It's got a little button. Hear the solenoid click. So it's just got that little button on it. Here's the ground clamp. It's magnetic. I just put it over the one I'm not going to be working on right away. You can, if I don't earthquake you guys down here, you can put this slide hammer tool on it with a pin on the end if you like. I have a tip right here to weld wave wire, wiggle wire, whatever you want to call it. I also have a claw that you can hook to the wiggle wire if you need to pull a long crease. A bunch of extra electrodes I just happened to pick up when I was buying this machine's accessory kit, because all it had with it was the pin when I got it. And where is it? I believe it's setting over here. Sorry about that. I'm not sure where that cut off. The memory card filled up. rookie mistake. I've also got this arm that I built, and basically they sell an arm. It's like a stud leveler arm. You put your pin through it and then use it as a lever to lift up. So without further ado, I'm going to show you a little bit of this and see if we can't capture some. I don't have a whole lot of time left on my battery here, and I need to get some bigger memory cards, but hey, that's the way it goes. Just give you a little shot there. I know the lighting's not the greatest, but basically I'm going to start drawing this up. Now normally you would start from the outside of the damage toward the center, but I'm going to start part of the way through and see if it brings some of this outside up. In the meanwhile, I'm also going to put my lever bar on a body line so that I do not cave the door down in, and I'm not going to pull real hard. I'm just going to try a couple of spots here. Just to see if I can bring this outside metal up a little bit. It's already brought it up a ton, just that little bit. I'm going to do a pull here and a pull here, and I probably won't even have to go out this far, and then I'll focus on that middle. My goal is to bring this center up so that it's level with the rest of the door, so when I attach a mirror to it, there's not a bunch of body filler around my rivet nut. Notice the whole door is kind of flexing as I do this, but I'm not getting carried away. We're not hammering away on it. I'll try one more spot down here, and I'm going to go for the center of it. There it is. I just watched it come back up. Now, if you work this metal too much, see we got a little oil can situation here because this is still real low. I want to stretch this metal way beyond belief and end up having to shrink it in a bunch of spots. Sometimes if you just pin weld it and hold it up, when it cools it'll help it, but that's not gonna do it in this case. Couple more spots and then I'm going to show you. You'll get the idea of what I'm trying to achieve here. I'm not a professional panel beater. If you pull too hard, you're going to pull up a bunch of little dimples all across this metal, which can be a mess in and of itself. It's actually really good everywhere but down here, just with that little bit of work. Like I said, when you take your time with this, it may look like you put a bunch of damage into it, but you can do it. You can certainly warp the heck out of one, but this one is not. Let's look at it the other way because that light is going to throw this off. You cannot see any light under that straight edge from side to side until you get right over, almost starting to get over the welded spot. See it right there. So we're probably little under 1/8 of an inch right in that center. You look at where my lines were on each side and it's touching now just with that little bit of work. So I almost pulled a high spot in it, right? Oh, I was on top of a piece of that weld bump. Yeah, that's pretty close. So you guys get the idea. I'll bring you back when I got something else to show you.